This is our 2024 20-pound test tippet shootout. And if you want to find out what the best 20-pound tippet is, you're going to want to stay tuned. If you've been following our channel for a while, you know that we've done a lot of different shootouts. And while those shootouts have traditionally focused on rods and reels, we wanted to bring something different to the mix. And so we decided to take on tippet. And since no one has done a tippet shootout for a while, and as far as I'm aware, no one's ever done a 20-pound test tippet shootout, we decided to start with that. So why 20-pound, you might be asking? Well, 20-pound is the maximum allowable size by the IGFA, and because of that, it's sort of become the standard maximum size that most saltwater anglers use. So if you want to buy, say, a bonefish or a permit leader, chances are the largest size it's going to come in is 20-pound. Now, that's not to say that I and other anglers can't use something heavier, or that the IGFA might not institute a 30-pound class at some point in the future. Or maybe they already have by the time you're watching this. But 20-pound is a generally very useful size in saltwater fishing, and we wanted to find out what the best one was. And while this video is largely just a teaser to tell you to head over to our blog and check out the detailed data that we've done for each of these 35 different 20-pound tippets, I'm actually going to go through and explain a lot of things because, as it turns out, when we were doing this testing, we found out the tippet is really complicated. So if you've already read that and were confused, or if you just want to get some information on video instead of reading it, this is the spot. To figure out which tippet was the best, we really focused on three key categories. The first one is tensile strength. And tensile strength essentially means the absolute max break strength of the material. So to test that, we stuck each of these tippets on our universal testing machine and broke them. And what that did is tell us exactly how strong the material really is at its absolute breaking point. Now, because fly fishermen tend to need to have knots at some point, and really all fishermen in general, we also tested knot strength. Knot strength, though, is a little bit more complicated. As we found out, there's a huge variation in knots that you thought you tied really, really well. You can have one knot that tested at 20 pounds, another that tested at 15. And the difference isn't really that visible. So because of that, our knot strength category is designed to be a representative sample of each of the materials. And it's not in any way designed to be a knot test. Maybe we'll do one of those in the future, but this is not it. To do that knot test, we tied uni knots because, quite frankly, they work the best for our machinery and are just easier to tie. If you want to know more, read the blog. And last but not least, we tested abrasion resistance. And like the knot test, there was a lot of variability between one test to the next, but we really did our best to make it as consistent as possible. And in addition to those three categories that we scored, we also tested a ton of other data. So we measured every diameter, we tied some wind knots, and we did some calculations on that data as well. But for various reasons, we felt that these three categories were the most important ones to score and the ones that really, really made a difference as far as tippet was concerned. In order to explain how we scored these, we're going to have to talk a little bit about the relationship between diameter and tensile strength and knot strength and abrasion resistance. And unfortunately, this is going to get a little bit technical. But the easiest way to think about this is on a graph. With any tippet material, the most important factor is going to be diameter. That's how manufacturers produce it, and that's the standard by which all of these tests are measured. And so we took our diameter measurements and then compared them to tensile strength. And we did that because if you're fishing, you want to have the smallest diameter possible most of the time. The smallest diameter that gives you the most break strength is going to be the best tippet for most applications. And there are some times when that's not the case, but I'm going to talk about that later in the video. And from a material standpoint, the best material is going to have the smallest diameter and the highest break strength. Hopefully I haven't lost anybody. Now, as it turns out, that relationship is complicated. It's represented by a formula like this one. And since that formula really doesn't make any sense in the outside world, I like to think about it in terms of a graph. And on this graph, we've plotted diameter to pound test on a curve. And then we've also added all of our 20-pound tippets to this so you can see the relationships. And of course, this graph is going to be available on our Tippet Shootout, so no need to pause this video, just head over to our blog if you want to dive in. And the most important way to compare these materials is if a material is up or to the left of another material, it is better. Similarly, if it is down or to the right, it's probably a worse material overall. Again, we're assuming the best material has the smallest diameter to the highest break strength. So I can say with a great deal of confidence that Rio PowerFlex is not as good of a material as SA Absolute Clear. And you can see quite easily on the graph that Rio PowerFlex is lower and a little bit to the right of that Absolute Clear. So we know that that's a better one. Unfortunately, a lot of the tippets, as you compare them, fall into the quadrant of somewhat to the right and somewhat up. And that's where things get complicated and why we needed to come up with a score to do this. And I'm not going to bore you with some very complicated math, but that is how we arrived at our tippet score. We used this power formula and came up with a number from 1 to 100 to evaluate these tippets. And if you're confused about those numbers, you can check out this graph and you'll see that the higher numbers refer to tippets that are more up and more to the left than the other ones. And similarly, the really low numbers are going to be down and to the right. And that same principle is going to apply to knot strength and to a limited extent to abrasion resistance. But as we were testing abrasion resistance, we found out that that was even a little bit more complicated. You see, with the sandpaper that we used, that sandpaper is able to cut through all of the tippet pretty much equivalently. So the relationship between diameter and true strength after the material has been abraded is almost 1-to-1. The difference between the hardest material and the softest material was not that much because the diameter is so much more important. And another way to think about that is every time we pass that sandpaper through, it's going to remove about the same amount of material. And because of that larger diameter, the area of the cross section is higher. And because of that, if we're removing the same amount of material, there's a lot more material remaining when your diameter is larger. And just to be clear, our score of abrasion resistance is designed to be the score of that material. If you're looking for the absolute most abrasion resistance, that's going to come from the material with the highest diameter. And in this case, it's going to be SA hard mono. And as we made our way through this test, some really interesting conclusions happened. And specifically, I think there are a lot of myths about nylon versus fluorocarbon. And unfortunately, we couldn't test them all as part of this shootout. So I'm not going to dive into that too deeply, but expect a full nylon versus fluorocarbon test to come out in the near future. And among those things that we couldn't test are light refraction, how clear a tippet is underwater, and UV degradation. Of course, I would have liked to, but we just ran out of time. And with that, hopefully I haven't lost too many of you, or if I have, you're reading it on the blog. But let's talk about what the best 20-pound tippet is. And I gotta say, I was pretty surprised. I've been fishing variations of Rio and SA Fluoro for a really, really long time. And I've had great success across the globe with each of those materials. But the winner was in fact SA Absolute Clear Nylon. This material here takes the cake for being one of the absolute best performers on the market. It's super thin, it's got great break strength, it stands up to abrasion reasonably well for a material of this thickness, and it's also got really great knot strength. Of course, I'm looking forward to doing a full nylon versus fluoro test at some point in the future, but as it stands in this shootout, if you're looking for the best, this is it. But if you've been fishing fluoro for years and years, and you're a little bit skeptical, like I used to be, and you're wondering what the best fluorocarbon is, that's going to be SA Absolute Fluorocarbon Saltwater Supreme. That's a mouthful. And this is in fact one of the most expensive fluorocarbons on the market at almost $1 per yard. But like the Absolute Clear, which was about a quarter of the price, this also had excellent properties. It's one of the thinnest, strongest fluorocarbons. It's got pretty good knot strength and did a really good job on the abrasion tests as well. Now, switching back to nylon, if you're thinking, I like this SA nylon, but it's still a little bit pricey for me, the best value nylon is Orvis Super Strong. This nylon is honestly almost as good as the SA version, which is really no surprise since Orvis and SA are part of the same company. But Orvis nylon comes in at a very wallet-friendly 18 cents per yard. And again, if you're a diehard fluoro guy and you're wondering what the best value fluoro is, that's going to be Seagar Tatsu. Now, if you're a fly fisherman, you've probably never heard of this because this comes in a 200-yard spool, and you definitely wouldn't want this hanging off of your chest pack. But Seagar is one of the original makers and one of the patent holders for fluorocarbon, and they make some of the absolute best fluorocarbon out there, and this is no exception. And because you're buying this bulk spool, you're able to get this for the 30+ cents per yard, which is almost a third of the cost of our winner. And it scored fairly similarly, though not quite as well as the SA Saltwater Supreme. But if you're looking for something in the middle that's not quite as good as that Tatsu or the Saltwater Supreme, but cheaper and a little bit more well-designed for the fly fisherman, I recommend Umpqua Deceiver HD Big Game Fluoro. And while you're definitely going to give up something with the Deceiver Big Game Fluoro in terms of the overall quality of the material, it's not a lot. And it's really got excellent knot strength as well. And in terms of pricing, it's about midway between that Tatsu and the Saltwater Supreme. And while I teased this a little bit earlier, the most abrasion-resistant tippet is going to be SA Hard Mono. Now, hard mono doesn't actually score well in terms of abrasion resistance on our test because the material is not that good. This really has an enormously high diameter, but if you're looking for the best abrasion resistance at any diameter, this is going to have it. So if you're looking to fish a guaranteed 20-pound class tippet and give yourself the best chance of landing fish in those environments where abrasion resistance is important, this is going to do it. But in terms of diameters, this 20-pound hard mono really comes into about a 40-pound fluorocarbon. So you might as well just fish 40-pound fluoro unless you're going for a record. As an aside, hard mono really only has a place for those people who are really interested in maintaining that class tippet. This is going to give you a ton of abrasion resistance, but it does it at the price of being way thicker than almost everything else in this test. In fact, like I said, most of the high-end nylons and fluoros could easily test out double what this does at the same diameter. And last but not least, I did want to touch on the best IGFA tippet. And for that, we took the very, very limited number of tippets that tested with a tensile strength under 20 pounds, and that one turned out to be Rio Powerflex. This got really, really close to that 20-pound mark, and it also did the best in our tensile strength, knot strength, and abrasion scores. So if you're looking to go for that world record, try Rio Powerflex. But of course, make sure you have the IGFA test it because I don't want to get an angry letter. So thanks for sticking around for this long technical video. And if you did, you probably deserve to go over to our blog and read about this shootout. There's tons more data, and we go into every one of these 35 different tippets in great depth and detail, and you're going to learn a lot. I certainly did. If you have questions about tippet, we've got answers. Give us a call at 888-413-5211 or email us 24/7 at support@tridentflyfishing.com. I'm Ben. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.